Welcome everybody. We're beginning this webinar series on the changes in the version 9 of the Australian curriculum and the differences between the previous version 8.4 and the new version 9. And yeah, this is the first of 4 parts of the webinar series. Each of them are sort of 15 to 20 minute segments on different topics within the digital technologies learning area curriculum. And then there will also be a separate live webinar that's all about the digital literacy general capability, which is the evolution of the previous ICT general capability. So in total, there'll be 5 webinars, and we'd be delighted to have you at each one. I'm just going to go on to the next slide where we'll introduce ourselves. My name's Nathan. I'm Professional Learning Coordinator at Digital Learning and Teaching Victoria. And yeah, we wanted to set this up because we thought Victorian teachers particularly, or teachers all over Australia, would be interested to hear about the changes that have come up with the version 9 of the Australian curriculum, especially if you've already begun teaching version 8.4, or your school's beginning to implement digital technologies now and you'd like to see what's in version 9. And we've invited Bruce from Grok Academy, and also Paula, who is known to Victorian teachers a lot, but also now does some work for Grok Academy. And I'll ask Bruce and Paula to introduce themselves now.
Thanks a lot, Nathan. Hi, everyone. So my name's Bruce Huder, and I've been down to Victoria for various events in the past, so I probably met a few of you in person. But my role at Grok Academy now is Head of Education, specifically curriculum. And I'm here today to sort of share some of the thinking behind the changes in V9 as one of the authors of V8, along with Paula and James Curran, who is our CEO at Grok. You know, we were really interested in what the changes for V9 were going to look like. And then James was appointed as the reviewer for Digital Technologies version 9. And during that process, Paula, myself, and Anna also contributed to the new version 9 curriculum. So, you know, we've been called in here to, I guess, share some of the thinking around those changes and give you some context as to why the version 9 curriculum is what it is. Paula, it's over to you.
Oh, thank you, Bruce. Hello, everyone. Yes, I have the privilege of being working for Grok, but also being a member of DLTV's Committee of Management and a lifetime member. So this is a particularly sweet spot for me to be with both of my allegiances in the one place. As Bruce has said, I was one of the original authors for the digital technologies curriculum as well as ICT, and I was invited by ACARA to help contribute with the version 9. Thank you.
And for those of you in Victoria, a little part of each of these segments will be looking at potential implications for Victoria from these changes to the Australian curriculum. And you know, we'll be speculating a little bit, but we won't be, you know, taking any authoritative position on what might happen in Victoria from these changes in the Australian curriculum. In this initial one, we also wanted to just briefly show you where to go and how to navigate and find the digital technologies curriculum and a relevant document on the version 9 website. That's the website URL there. I'm just going to very quickly now do a little quick intro to that web page, so those of you who are brand new can have a quick look at how to navigate that page. So here we go. So that's what the page looks like when you go there. The actual Digitech curriculum comes up if you go to F10 and then choose the subject. So if we go down here, we can choose digital technologies in the list under technology, of course. Select that one, and then you are required to select at least one year level to continue. Just for demonstration, I'll do 5, 6, 7, and 8. And we'll hit submit. And when we do that, we get the web page coming up in a moment. Now, the other resource, let's just quickly look at this. There is a little bit there where you can click on to get an overview of the learning area. But this is what it will look like. And you've got a level description at the top, achievement standards, and then your content descriptions. And these are just listed down here. And of course, you've got a button to click there to see elaborations. And of course, in the Australian curriculum, the content descriptors are divided into these two groups: knowledge and understanding, and processes and production skills. Of course, in the Victorian curriculum, the Digitech learning area has a different structure where it's split up into 3 strands. Those familiar with the VCAR curriculum would be more familiar with that structure. But this is how it's done in the Australian curriculum. One last thing we also wanted to show you was the comparative document, so that if you really want just the details on what's changed from version 8 to version 9, if you go to downloads and then click on learning areas here and choose technologies, digital technologies, you can get the comparative information from this link, and that's a Word document that you can have a look at as well. We're not going to be relying on that document in these webinars, but that's where you can find that. So I'll return us now to the slides, and I'll let Bruce take it from here. So let me switch back to our slides now, and we'll continue. Thanks, Bruce.
All right, thanks, Nathan. And today's session, we're going to look at 2 of the concepts in the V9 curriculum. That's digital systems and privacy and security. And privacy and security is actually new. It's been inserted for the first time in version 9. It wasn't present in version 8. So before we dive into those 2 specifically, let's talk a little bit about some of the broader changes in the Australian curriculum that has had implications for digital technologies. We'll go into a bit more detail in this session, but we'll briefly mention it in future sessions and refer people back to here. So all learning areas now are organized around core concepts. Digital technologies already had key concepts as an organizing sort of structure in version 8, but now that's present right across the board. Another big change is that in every learning area, foundation or prep in Victoria has now got its own band description, content descriptions and achievement standard. That's no longer in that broader F to 2 grouping like it was in some of the learning areas. The ICT capability has become digital literacy, which is something Nathan mentioned before, and we'll talk more about that in our hour-long webinar after we've done the digital technologies. The links between the subjects and the general capabilities have been made much more explicit, and you'll see that when you actually navigate the Australian curriculum website. It calls out the general capabilities in a more direct way than was present and in version 8. And the other thing that's been done is there has been an effort to ensure that all of the skills and knowledge that are represented in the general capabilities are taught somewhere in a corresponding subject, and we'll see the implications for that in digital technologies a little bit later on in one of our future webinars. The other big change that I think is fantastic for teachers is there have been significant improvements to the elaborations, and we'll look at the digital technologies ones specifically when we get up to some of the example content descriptions that we pulled out for these presentations. But I think that's going to be a real boon to teachers to really understand what the content descriptions are aiming to achieve in the classroom. So when we look at digital systems and privacy and security today, you can see this is the breakdown of learning area concepts and subject concepts in digital technologies. Digital systems sort of fits into the systems thinking concepts from the learning area. Note that this is a very rough mapping. It's not that these are exclusively set up to be categorized in such a way. The learning area concepts are sort of all-encompassing, but those are the 2 that are most related to the digital systems and privacy and security concepts. And the digital technologies one specifically, abstraction you'll find appears in all of the concepts that are covered. It's really sort of an underpinning organizational element. But today, as I said, we're focusing on digital systems and privacy and security. And across the 4 webinars, we'll actually touch on all of these concepts to give you a sense of how they are reflected in version 9 of the curriculum. So as we said, this session's on digital systems and privacy and security. The big things are some updates to digital systems and, as I said, the introduction of the privacy and security concept. So we'll step through some examples of these to give you a sense of what it all looks like. And first up, what's new in digital systems? Something that I'm sure all primary teachers are going to be excited about is that there's no new content for prep to year 6, but some effort's been made to ensure that the expectations and the content descriptions are far clearer for them to understand. The other thing that's been done is version 8 of the curriculum was quite conservative on the number of content descriptions that it used. And what that led to was you would often get content descriptions that required teachers to cover multiple concepts or ideas that were mashed together, which made it very difficult to understand what the intent was. And so in version 9, those content descriptions have all been split apart. So what you'll find in digital systems is that there tends to be a content description for anything that is around systems, whether it's their purpose or their use or components and peripherals, that kind of thing, and a separate one that's a little bit more related to the network's content, which is where transmission of data and that idea of communication as systems lives. In addition to that, there's been general refinement across the board. The content descriptions now use cleaner and more direct language to assist with the clarity. And that's really obvious when you look at what has happened in Year 7 and 8, where the relationship between specifications and performance in systems has been made much clearer, and it's been divorced from networks, because the previous content description in Year 7 and 8, it wasn't really clear exactly what specifications you were supposed to be exploring with students. So this split that's been done between systems and networks has really made it much easier for teachers to understand what the expectations are in that band level in particular. I mentioned privacy and security is new. The main thing that you'll see when we look at privacy is a lot of it is around data and the privacy of data. So we introduce this concept of ownership very early in the curriculum in prep. As we move through primary school, we start looking at the implications of online services and talk about digital footprint permanence and what the implications there on privacy are. And then by the time you're in Year 10, you're looking at how the Australian privacy principles apply and what appropriate use of data is in systems. So that's kind of what privacy covers in version 9. Security has some significant links to digital literacy, particularly around accessing and using online accounts. So you'll see references to password hygiene and risks of reuse of passwords in the primary school. By the time we hit Year 7 and 8, we're talking about multi-factor authentication and how that protects against compromised systems and phishing attacks. And by the time we're in Year 9 and 10, we're looking at software vulnerabilities and other types of vulnerabilities as well, such as supply chain vulnerabilities, and how we think about modeling threats to understand and mitigate against those vulnerabilities. So this is new content, but a lot of it is actually closely related to what used to be in the ICT capability and now appears in digital literacy. So you'll find that the content descriptions, as I've mentioned before, have been split apart and have been updated and have improved elaborations. What we're going to do in this section of the webinar is just have a look at a few different ones, see what this splitting apart and updates actually look like, and then we'll demonstrate some of the elaborations that you'll see associated with those content descriptions, so you can get a clearer sense of exactly how much they've improved to help with interpreting the curriculum. I've taken a selection of content descriptions here, and so in version 8 we had this one for Year 5 and 6, which were, you can see it merges the components of common digital systems and networks into a single content description, and it's possible that interpretation of that is a little bit ambiguous. So it's not clear whether it's the components in the systems that are connecting to form networks, or whether it's the systems themselves. You can see that in the new version we've got the main internal components and their function as one content description, and the second one is how networks are formed and what transmission is. So that separation now, you can see there's no new content there, even though there's now 2 content descriptions, but the separation makes it really, really clear where the line is between understanding components and function and what we want students to understand about networks. And this really sort of jumps out in the elaborations. So if we have a look at just the networks component for this band level, Year 5 and 6, we can see that there's not an expectation that we get particularly technical here. We're not talking about protocols or anything like that that are involved in network communication. We just want students to understand that data is exchanged, and that can occur in a number of different ways, whether that's through physical hardware like a cable, or whether it's wirelessly through radio waves. And then we've also got the idea of data being broken up into smaller pieces so that it gets passed to the destination through other devices. That's it. That's the extent of the concept. We're not expecting students to talk about, you know, the protocols involved or anything like that. It's really just that idea that communication in a network goes through multiple devices and is broken up into small pieces along the way. In year 7 and 8, this is an example of the one with the specifications and performance that I mentioned before. You can see that when we break that apart, we've got the expectation that students understand how hardware specifications for different components are related to specific tasks and workloads. Note that that isn't linked back to networks in the same way like it was before. And then we want students to understand how data is transmitted and secured in network. So it's the security in year 8, in year 7 and 8, that is different from the previous one. And that's where we can start to explore some technical protocols a little bit more. You can see here some good examples of the types of things we expect students to understand around specification and performance. The idea that RAM is necessary for authoring on device, but bandwidth affects download speed. So, you know, the idea here is that students are developing enough sort of fluency and literacy in the broader sort of, you know, general sense of what computing is, so that they can make smart decisions about the devices they're using for different tasks. And, you know, talking about graphics cards for gaming or external storage for video really draws those distinctions between, you know, what items or components in a system are required for what purpose, and how the specifications you choose for those components will enable different types of things. For privacy and security, everything's new. And so what I've got here are the privacy and security content descriptions for year 3 and 4. And you can see that the idea here was to, because this is new content, we didn't want to, I guess, impose a whole lot of new stuff on primary school. The whole point of the version 9 curriculum was to try to streamline things, to make it easier to cover all of the expected content. So all of the connections to privacy and security here, you'll see that they're linked to sort of standard things that a student would do. So accessing their school account is something that students in year 3, 4 are starting to embark on. The emphasis here on security is that your password should be hard to guess, but easy for you to remember. So that's a relatively simple concept and idea that a lot of teachers probably already explore as part of their ICT capability, but you can see we've just called it out to make it explicit. And similarly, because we're starting to see students explore the online space, usually in a safe space, they're using their school cloud or something like that, it's an opportunity to start talking about how online accounts can open them up to risk, and understanding that when they sign up for an account and enter personal data, that's being stored somewhere else. And in year 9 and 10, we've got the threat modeling. I mentioned that before as something new, and the Australian privacy principles. This is really just taking students to the point where they begin to think about security first when they're looking at a system, and, you know, the design decisions that you need to make to ensure that you're protecting against potential vulnerabilities. And the privacy principles is actually a really practical way for them to understand what expectations they should have for online systems, particularly the ones that they use and interact with regularly. So a lot of social media, for example, would be reflected in expectations around the privacy principles. And when they're designing their own solutions, to really think carefully about what data they need and what data they don't. That's really drawn out here in the elaborations around what threat modeling actually looks like. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but I think these elaborations are a really good example of practical activities that you can do with students to help them understand the principle of threat modeling and what they should be looking for when they're exploring vulnerabilities. And being able to have a reference like this that will help you with your planning, I think, is a real strength of the improved elaborations in version 9 of the curriculum.
So this slide here, implications for Victoria, this is where we, for each of these segments, will look at some of the things that we've looked at so far in the Australian curriculum version 9, and seeing what that might mean in Victoria, whether our curriculum will change to adapt, or you know, what will happen. So this first one, Paula, well, the one that we've got today really that's changed is this, what might happen with this whole new privacy and security concept that's now appearing in the Australian curriculum. Would it be slotted into some of our structures there, the digital systems or the data information strand, or does it have implications for the way that we currently handle ICT proficiencies and that sort of area in the Victorian curriculum?
Yeah, I think what you're saying is correct, Nathan, in terms of saying that we don't know what the Victorian Curriculum and Assessment Authority is going to do with the version 9, whether it will be modified to be the Victorian curriculum, and as a consequence that's just structured with 3 strands. So I suppose we can only guess, or not even guess, what's going to be allocated to what, but it is critical, I think, that we know that there's new content in here and that there are 2 possible places within the current construct, with digital systems as one of the strands and privacy with data and information. There's a little bit of privacy already within data and information that runs along there, so that could be the 2 homes that it goes. But as we have said, because VCAA has made no public statement at the moment about the way it will proceed, we've just got a question mark with those. But for those schools that are using the Australian curriculum, then obviously they will continue with version 9.
One little thing I did note on the previous elaboration there, under that content descriptor, using a data flow diagram, which is of course something that comes up in BCE, applied computing. So it's nice to see that tool coming up prior to BCE as well. So just the Bruce has called this the too long didn't read summary. I might just get you to just do this final summary and then we'll conclude this one.
So yeah, the big changes, well, no new content for digital systems, just improvement in clarity and elaborations to help you understand exactly what's expected. And if we look at privacy and summary, privacy and security, and the summary associated with that, then there's new content everywhere, but most of it has very strong links to digital literacy. So in terms of how much is involved, with the exception of probably that threat modeling stuff in Year 9 and 10, most of it is going to be captured in what is probably existing practice, where schools are already implementing the ICT capability effectively across the school.
Great, thank you. And our next session will be looking at data and particularly what Victorian teachers would currently find in the data and information strand. That's what we'll be looking at in the next session. So we look forward to seeing you then.
Thank you.